Good morning, Joshua. Severe weather, Wednesday morning video. I'm going to have another one here towards the evening and appreciate your time today. Hurricane Milton continues to plow towards the west central coast of Florida, and we continue to have a very powerful storm churning through the eastern Gulf of Mexico, making its final approach with landfall later tonight. I'm going to talk about what's changed since the last video, what we're seeing now, what could still change, and who's going to get what here in this video. So I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for trusting me with your weather. I am a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and right now we've got Category 4 hurricane, which is expected to weaken gradually during the day today and tonight, but still make landfall as a very powerful Category 4 hurricane near and just south of the Tampa Bay area, and that can include Bradenton and Sarasota and Northport. This will be one of Florida's worst storms based on the fact that the storm is going to hit a very populated area here in central Florida, and it is going to grow in size, expanding and creating quite a bit of hazard with it. The absolute worst case scenario would be this coming in just north of Tampa Bay, bringing the worst of that surge into the bay, into the heaviest areas of population. Right now, that is still on the table, but is not the particular forecast as the track is shifted just a tiny bit south, and that does make a huge difference. But it is not something we could rule out still at this point. We could see a wobble in either direction right now. So again, we've got to prepare for the worst as this storm moves in. Here's a look at the tropics. I'm going to spend most of this video on Milton, but I just want to give you a broad view of everything. Here's Florida right here, and Milton is gaining latitude now at the same latitude as the Keys and heading generally in this direction. It will make a bend to the right across central Florida and come out near the Space Coast or Treasure Coast. We do have a disturbance here that has a small chance of becoming a subtropical storm or even tropical storm passing south of Bermuda. The next name on the list is Nadine. And we also have resilient Leslie over here, which is fighting back and strengthening again as a hurricane. This is part 2. We have a wave that'll move off of Africa that is not a threat to land. And in the Pacific, we no longer look like we're going to have a storm here off the Mexican coast. So Milton is basically it. We'll keep an eye on Leslie here, but here's a closer view, and you can see a very large storm compared to 2 days ago when we had our second strongest Gulf hurricane on record. If you look at the lowest pressure, which got down to 895 millibars. Very rare air to see a storm that powerful and that close to land over the southern Gulf, very close to the Yucatan. Here you can see on our infrared image, there is some wind shear hitting the storm now from the west. That has been properly predicted, but I'll tell you what, Milton is still firing up thunderstorms here on the western side of the storm. So it's fighting off the wind shear right now, and the more it does that, the less likely it's going to weaken more rapidly before landfall. The models could be wrong in that the wind shear ends up being just a little bit too low before it hits, so we need to prepare for a Category 4 at this point. I don't think it's going to go back to 5, but it's still a very powerful storm. And I will say this. I've been doing this for lots of years. I've been a meteorologist since 2003. You really cannot get fixated on the category of the hurricane. Remember, Idalia was a Category 4 right before it hit. Ian was a Category 4, and none of those storms was exactly the same because of where they hit and how big they were. So this storm is one of our bigger ones here, not as big as Helene, but big enough. And right now the track takes it, continuing on this northwest track. It will eventually bend to the right, but the big question mark is, does that start sooner or does that start a little bit later? And anybody here, in this area is going to get hit hard with hurricane force winds. The bigger question mark is who's going to get the storm surge devastation the worst. And right now that looks to be just to the south of the Tampa Bay area and places like Bradenton, Sarasota, down maybe to Northport as well. This is a rapidly updating mesoscale view, floater view of the storm, and you can see it's still, even though the eye has filled up with some cirrus, it's still a very powerful storm. This is one of the strongest you're going to see here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico ever. It is weakening gradually, but you can see it is growing in size. You can see a very healthy outflow here on all sides. It's fighting back here in this direction, even though we do have wind shear. And the larger it gets, the more storm surge that we see piling up on the coast. I think that's something that everybody needs to stop underestimating. It's the storm surge. The category can come down 2 or 3, but if the storm gets bigger, that surge is going to be higher. And it was a problem with Ian. It was a huge problem with Katrina, even though Katrina weakened from 5 to 3 when it hit up in here. Because of how big it was, that surge ended up being just crushing. For those in Mississippi. and into Alabama and into southeast Louisiana. So that is one thing we're going to be very concerned with. There are other facets to the storm. The wind, obviously, but how about heavy rain? And we're going to talk more about the tornado threat that is beginning to grow now as this system is going to interact with a front and increasing jet energy. More wind aloft, more wind shear means more of a potential to see maybe a few stronger tornadoes. You can see on the Tampa Bay radar right now, we do have the eye right here. This is dry Tortugas. Here's Key West over here. So passing that latitude, now approaching the far northeastern Gulf of Mexico, which is this quadrant in here. And you can see we do have some rotation in these cells that is getting ready to move onshore the west coast. We may see tornado warnings. We do have some tornado warnings here with cells that are moving up through the Everglades up to Alligator Alley. So if you are on that highway this morning, you may have tornado warnings. And we're going to see this area fill in as the day wears on. But one of the concerns that I do have as well, because of how wet it's been, is this area of heavy rain that's going to be drenching all of central and into the northern peninsula through the day today, well in advance of Milton's effects. It's just going to rain all day long, and we could see several inches to over a foot of rain coming in this band of heavy rainfall. Here is the recon data from overnight while most of us were sleeping. You can see the pressure last night dropped down again to the low 900s. That's a very powerful hurricane. Came up to about 910, dropped again. Now it is starting to climb slowly, but it is not climbing to the point where we need to let our guards down. It's weakening a little bit, yes. I expected that was going to happen, but 917 millibars is still a borderline Category 5. And we just don't get those too often. We get them maybe once a year, once every few years. So a very incredible storm. And the latest recon data coming in here shows that the pressure is still coming up a little bit, down up to 923, so a very high-end Category 4. But you can also see here that the wind field continues to grow. Take a look at this area in here. This is all hurricane force wind. A few days ago, it was much stronger, but the area of hurricane force wind was here. It's now doubled that size. And with the wind shear that picks up, it's going to continue to grow. So a double-edged sword here where we've got on one end the weakening, but on the other end, the growing of the storm. Let's talk about the path here. It is officially being predicted as a Category 4 now at landfall. This is worsened. With that near Longboat Key here as a 130-mile-per-hour storm. Now, granted, Category 3 starts at 129 and drops down, so we're right on the border. Either way, if it's 125 or 130, I don't think that really is going to matter too much. What I think we need to be more focused on is who's going to get the worst of it. And we are still in Pinellas County all the way up through Clearwater and on northward. We're still in the cone. Even though the forecast track has shifted, we've seen wobbles with this storm on both sides, and you can see the eye over here is near the track, but actually a little bit on the western envelope of it. Now, this could go back in the other direction. So there's no guarantee that this storm still couldn't hit up in here. It's in the path. At the same time, we could also see it coming down in this direction. Those of you that got hit hard by Ian obviously do not want to see this. That's just a worst case for you. But we need to be preparing for hurricane conditions all the way down through Port Charlotte, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Bonita Springs, and the northern side of Naples. We also need to brace for the absolute worst in Bradenton, obviously, in Sarasota. But if this system, for whatever reason, comes onto this side and comes up in this direction, which some of our models are still showing, then if this storm comes in here, then Tampa Bay is going to get the worst of it. And the way that the water flows in here, we need to be preparing for that. It could come around and hit you from the east. It could hit from the southwest. Just a very difficult forecast, but one that no matter where you live, you're going to have the impact one way or another, whether it be the worst of the storm surge or the worst of the wind or tornadoes or the worst of the rain. Now, the threat doesn't stop here as it hits the west coast. We still have in the Orlando area, Lakeland area, all the way to the Space Coast, even to places like Melbourne and Vero Beach, Sebastian. We are likely to see hurricane conditions. A hurricane warning is in effect for those areas. Farther to the north, even though this track has shifted, if you're in Ocala, Gainesville, Jacksonville, Daytona, you're not out of the woods. And the reason why is because of where the jet stream's going to be and how it's going to add to the size of the storm on the western and northwestern side of it, the wind field's going to grow in your direction. Even though the absolute worst will probably follow near or just south of Interstate 4, the field of the wind is going to increase. And as the storm moves by, there could be a powerful, strong wind hitting from behind the storm after it hits. And I'm going to show you that here on the models in just a little bit. Here again is another view of our forecast. It's down now to 155, but still a very powerful hurricane. And this is the inland watches and warnings encompassing all of central Florida, parts of northern Florida, even parts of southwest Florida. Tropical storm warnings for the northwest Bahamas, southeast Florida, the Keys, southwest Florida, and to near the Big Bend as well, and for all of eastern Georgia. Tropical storm watches for the low country of South Carolina, the rest of the coastal empire of Georgia, and just east of Tallahassee. The storm surge forecast, because of our shift south, has been lowered a little bit for Tampa Bay, but 12 feet of storm surge can still be catastrophic. But the worst values will probably be south of Anna Maria Island down to Boca Grande. That includes the Sarasota area, Bradenton, of course, Northport, and then just below that, we're looking at 8 to 12 feet all the way down to Bonita Beach. The same places that got blasted in Ian 2 years ago are going to see incredible storm surge here. We are seeing 3 to 5 feet on the east coast of Florida, northeastern Florida, 2 to 4 feet across St. Johns River, and even up to 4 feet of surge all the way up into Hilton Head Island area of South Carolina. So you can see here that the storm growing obviously increases that storm surge threat. The winds are going to start to spread onshore this afternoon, but the worst will come tonight, and it will come pretty quickly. And as this crosses the state, we will likely see power outages beginning this afternoon in west central Florida, and then tonight into the overnight hours across the Orlando area, maybe down south of you, all the way down to places like Bartow and over to Melbourne, and also areas to the north. I think we could see substantial power outages even up to Jacksonville, and even maybe across the border into southeast Georgia, depending on how this storm grows here tomorrow. Heavy rainfall, we're getting it now, so we have a high risk of flooding through tomorrow morning across all of west central Florida and across east central Florida. That threat continues tomorrow afternoon and even into early tomorrow night before it comes to an end gradually by Friday morning. This is going to be a pretty nasty rain event for us here. We've talked about that for several days now. And where the storm tracks makes a big difference, and if you only get 6 inches of rain or you get 16. But you can see where the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center have that showing up here across this band, basically right along Interstate 4. Here is a look right now at the structure of the storm on our tropical models. They've been doing pretty well. There have been obviously some adjustments that we've had to make, but this is the HAVS B model, which has done well with this storm. And you can see there is some dry air starting to infiltrate the eye wall here on the southern side. It will be a partially broken eye wall by 5 o'clock tonight before that landfall, which is, it's good news in that it lowers the rainfall on the southern side of the storm. It may break up the wind just a tiny bit, but because of the growth of the storm, what you don't get in rain, you're going to get in storm surge here as this comes on shore. This is 8 o'clock tonight. This is 11. The storm is going to be a low-end Category 4 potentially as it gets very close to the lowering of Tampa Bay, Bradenton probably right here. And then you can see the wind field actually will expand on the northern side here. And we're going to see substantial moisture and substantial wind here on the backside of our storm here into tomorrow morning before the storm leaves tomorrow afternoon. It's going to take a while to get this to go. But the eye wall, if I can circle it for you here, as it's coming on shore, even though the storm is expected to, right now at least, track into Manatee County, this is the eye wall right here. And this gets all of Tampa, Brandon, even close to Lakeland in the mix here with the strongest amount of wind. And it will head in this direction towards the Orlando area as well during the overnight hours. That's where our worst wind will be. That's where we'll see the worst damage. That's where we're likely to see the highest number of power outages. Here's another tropical model. This is the HWRF, and it is a little bit more intact here. It's got the weakening coming a little bit later, but it's also later on landfall. This is 11 o'clock tonight, and it makes landfall basically at the opening here. Piney Point, I believe, here at the opening of Tampa Bay. So it's a little farther north. It's not the worst case scenario for Tampa, but look at where the strongest winds are going to be. So storm surge may be a little bit lower in Tampa Bay, but the winds will be higher. So either way, you know, it's you just can't win here with this double-edged sword. So as we move into the overnight hours, the storm is going to weaken. The HWRF does not weaken it as quickly as the other models. It does not decay the wind. This could be very intense winds in the Orlando and Daytona areas and on the Space Coast, with the worst of that hitting sometime between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then obviously our storm's going to move away pretty quickly by the end of the week. These are where the models are showing landfall, and you can see a pretty good clustering in Manatee and northern Sarasota County. The Hurricane Center brings it right at the border here over Longboat Key. We have some models that are as far south as central Sarasota County. There's several there. There are still models that have it in Pinellas County or going right up the bay and hitting Hillsborough County on the south side of Tampa. So Alan is a colleague of mine from back in the day here in Raleigh, Alan Huffman. His track takes it basically where the Hurricane Center does, and he's a great forecaster, so I trust him. But this is his graphic, and obviously the landfall point is important. But at the same time, because of the size of the eye wall, a storm making landfall here will have the eye wall with it in here. And that's going to be extremely important, that local effect here of the wind. Here's where the HAFS model takes our wind gusts here. You can see by 8 o'clock tonight, we already are starting to feel hurricane force winds at the coast here, gusting over 80 miles per hour in St. Petersburg and Clearwater, and then climbing over 90 miles per hour, and then probably over 100 at some point in here, especially around the Bradenton area, but as well over the Tampa Bay immediate metropolitan area. And then these winds continue inland, and you'll see there's significant wind potential here, at least 60 to 70 miles per hour as this moves through the Orlando area overnight and first thing tomorrow morning. And then the winds actually are going to increase as the storm moves offshore, and that is a sign of this transitioning into a post-tropical storm, kind of a hybrid storm. It's got the jet stream energy, it's got the front merging with the low. So it's no longer really going to be fully tropical. It's going to look a lot different, but it's also going to have a ton of backlash rain and wind with it because of that. If you all remember Hurricane Sandy, like nobody doesn't, that storm technically lost its tropical characteristics in the final hours before it hit. But because of that post-tropical transition, the storm surge and the winds were extreme on the Jersey Shore and Delaware and Long Island and all of the mid-Atlantic region. So that technically was a Category 4 hurricane that became post-tropical. This is going to have some similarity to it. It's that time of year now, but obviously the waters are a lot warmer down in here, but it's going to grow in the way that Sandy did, even as it's leaving the coastline here. So if you're in Georgia and in the Carolinas right now, it looks like it's going to be a close call, but probably the strongest wind stays just offshore of you here. It's more of a storm surge issue. You're going to have some rain, though, for sure. Here's one other tropical model, just to give you all another perspective. This one's farther south. It has the storm actually hitting just north of Sarasota. You could see the eye wall, if it goes in here, would crush Bradenton and Sarasota with over 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts, but big enough to where even St. Pete could see wind gusts over 95 miles per hour. And this one actually has a stronger band of wind in places like Lakeland and Bartow and Bowling Green, Florida, and all the way up here towards Oviedo, towards Daytona, and many of the coastal regions here, and even hurricane force winds here on Cape Canaveral into the afternoon tomorrow, potentially. And then it leaves and things are going to quiet down after that. One other thing we haven't talked a lot about, but is becoming more apparent today, is that there's going to be not just a chance for tornadoes, but a few strong tornadoes here across parts of west central Florida over to just north and west of Lake Okeechobee. Inland areas here, you need to be preparing for that. The Fort Myers area, the Venice, Florida area, Port Charlotte, all of you are in that risk for some strong tornadoes. That's the hatched area. And if you take a look at some of our model runs, you will see supercell type storms here popping up this afternoon, late this morning into the afternoon from Tampa on east and southward towards the Everglades. And these are going to expand to the East Coast, by the way. So Melbourne, Fort Pierce, Palm Beach, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, all of you have that risk of seeing a few tornadoes in this band. And then there's another band that comes on shore right ahead of our storm here late this evening and overnight tonight. So multiple rounds of tornadoes are going to be possible. This could produce some pretty strong tornadoes with it. If you take a look at the tornado parameters, they do start to climb here later this morning. This is 11 a.m., and we're starting to see that higher risk. And then into the afternoon, we definitely have an increased risk of some tornadoes, kind of in two bands. This is 4 o'clock this afternoon, then we see the next round coming on shore. So something we need to be preparing for as well. Even if you don't get the hurricane force winds, you could have a tornado touch down very quickly in your backyard here. So be prepared for that. I do think our risk for tornadoes will start to come down tonight after about midnight as the storm is weakening and moving away. And it should be a lot better day for tomorrow. But take a look at some of this helicity. This is turning in the atmosphere, and some strong updrafts are expected here by 2 in the afternoon, and then it increases here through 7 o'clock. And there's a pretty good swath here of potential tornadoes that may cross portions of south central Florida here from the west coast on east. And we need to keep an eye on southeastern Florida as well. So keep that in mind here if you are in the Florida Peninsula. This could be a tornado outbreak as well tonight. But elsewhere, aside from Leslie, no major threats, and Leslie's not really a threat. We do have a disturbance, AL93. We've been watching this. Probably got a slight chance to become Tropical Storm Nadine as it passes near Bermuda overnight tonight. Then that'll be it. And then here's the next one, which right now I don't think is going to develop. We're going to have a little bit quieter period here later this week after these storms move away. So here we go, the track again for Milton. Here is AL93. Here's Bermuda. This is Hurricane Leslie, 80-mile-per-hour storm recurving. The remains here of Kirk have already moved into western France, and you can see it's a much weaker system. And then here's our tropical wave near Guinea-Bissau and Guinea, and that will come offshore tonight and has a slight chance of developing near the Cabo Verdes, but again, not a big deal. Real quick, we're going to look here at this invest. For those of you watching from Bermuda, here's the circulation center. It's very exposed, but a lot of rain out ahead of it hitting you in Bermuda today. Obviously, the wind shear from Milton is going to play a factor in how strong this can get, and I don't think it gets much stronger than it is now, which might be 40 miles per hour. And our track is well behaved here. It goes into the north central Atlantic and then weakens quite a bit. Leslie, on the other hand, she believes she could, and she did. And she is looking pretty healthy here. Not a big storm. This is smaller than what Milton was in the Southwest Gulf a couple of days ago, but pretty good banding features in here. And Leslie may be strengthening. We may even see a Category 2 here as we get into this afternoon and tonight before we hit some cooler water overnight into tomorrow. So no threat here, but we may see some gusty winds in the Azores come this weekend. One last thing I've been hinting at, and the confidence level's low, but we may see another storm in the Western Caribbean. It's going to take some time to form here. You can see the wind shear drops down. That's this lighter color. And we have another potential gyre that will spin up some low pressure here. And obviously, we've got a lot of uncertainty here. This is a week from today, but we may see something form out of this. Maybe either that's Nadine if we don't get Nadine now, or it's Oscar. After that, we want to keep an eye on it in Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Central America, and maybe even the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of uncertainty here. We've had some GFS runs that have been very aggressive with it. And the run yesterday brought it into Louisiana, which is not showing up again today. So obviously I'm not going to forecast that. But here you can see on the operational GFS, in about a week, we've got low pressure forming north of Honduras and tracking towards Cuba here at the end of next week. And this is not good for Florida, this particular track. Even if it's not strong, that's rain. We don't need that. But again, we're just going to have to keep an eye down here. I'm not hitting the panic button at this point. I don't see a lot of confidence yet, but it's something I've been watching since basically last weekend. Just that may be our end game here in the Gulf of Mexico. So my thoughts and prayers are with everybody in the track of the storm. I appreciate y'all's time today. Please heed all local warnings. I will post throughout the day, and I'm going to do another video here after work around 5 or 6 o'clock tonight. And as always, I want to honor God and give him all the glory. We serve a wonderful God, and Paul tells the Church of Rome, Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. That is everybody. We serve a wonderful God, and his power, not our power, is what saves us in the end. And all we have to do is make the choice to follow him. And despite everything we see out there today, the evil in the world, these natural disasters, we know that there's still a mighty God that we serve. And we've seen how he's worked in people who have been, rushing to the aid of those that were affected by Hurricane Helene all the way up into the mountains of the Carolinas and Virginia. That is God's work there, allowing people to come together. And just know that I am in prayer for everybody in the path of this storm. This is obviously something that is really bothering me and keeping me up all night. But in the end, we can only do so much. We have to turn it all over to God and tell him how big our problems are. And in response, we get to tell our problems how big our God is. And that's the best part. So I will catch up with you all again later. Please be safe. Take care.